Welcome to our channel, Infidelity Exposed. Today's story is about an innocent man whose life is turned upside down when he discovers something he had no idea about. Hope you enjoy. James was excited about having the house all to himself, something that hadn't happened in years, and his wife Beth had finally taken a few days off to take the kids on a beach trip. She had planned everything carefully, wanting to give the kids an unforgettable experience. James, however, stayed home immersed in work, but thoughts of some peace and quiet was almost reward in itself. On the first night alone, while catching up on some tasks, James heard a knock on the door. Opening it, he found his neighbor George looking more animated than usual. George was the kind of guy who loved keeping an eye on things around him, and without much ceremony, he started mentioning how he just installed cameras around his house. "It's a necessary security measure these days," George said with a serious look. He talked about the importance of staying protected and suggested James do the same, especially since he was temporarily alone. At first, James thought the idea was a bit much. After all, the neighborhood was calm, and everyone knew each other. But George was persistent, bringing up friends who'd had unpleasant experiences and emphasizing that precautions were never too much. Security is never over the top, since George, who knew cameras, said it would be such a relief. James couldn't ignore what his neighbor had said, as the thought of someone being in the house without him knowing planted a seed of unease, and with Beth and the kids away, maybe he should take it more seriously. That same night, he began browsing security cameras online. He quickly found a practical model that allowed real-time monitoring from his phone, and feeling an odd urgency to act fast, James completed the purchase, thinking it could be an extra guarantee for his peace of mind. When the cameras arrived, James spent an entire afternoon setting them up. He checked each one carefully, adjusting angles and setting them to cover entrances, exits, and key spots like the garage. Once they were activated, he tested the app to make sure everything was working properly. He was pleased with the setup, and he felt relieved, as though he'd done enough to secure the house, but in his excitement and rush to get everything set up, James had overlooked one important detail. He hadn't mentioned the cameras to Beth, and the days passed quickly, and James could hardly wait to have Beth and the kids back. When they returned, the house seemed to come alive again. The kids' laughter echoed through the halls, and the aroma of Beth's dinner filled the air, bringing back the sense of normalcy and comfort he loved. James felt his heart warm, as if the temporary absence had made the reunion even sweeter. Things seemed normal, and life returned to its usual rhythm. The kids went to school every morning, while James and Beth divided their time between daily chores and quiet evenings together, watching a movie or talking on the porch about how much they'd missed each other. Beth's presence filled the house with an energy he hadn't realized he could miss so much. On a Tuesday morning, while reviewing emails at work, James remembered the cameras he'd installed. Curiously, he opened the monitoring app for the first time since the family had returned, as he wasn't expecting to find anything unusual. He just wanted to check that the cameras were working, since he hadn't reviewed them since installation. As soon as he accessed the footage, something caught his eye. It was an image showing an unfamiliar man entering his home, and the timestamp indicated that the visit occurred while the kids were at school and Beth was supposed to be at home. He tried to recall if she'd mentioned any maintenance or a professional coming by, but nothing came to mind. The man didn't look like a technician or anyone familiar, and his appearance and behavior stirred a strange sense of unease in James. He replayed the video several times, trying to find a reasonable explanation. He thought, was it someone from the water company or an electrician, as he struggled to calm the thoughts that were starting to pile up. Something about the footage disturbed him deeply, the way the stranger moved through the house, as if he knew every corner. James shrugged it off, trying to convince himself it might be a misunderstanding or something trivial, yet a small doubt began to grow in his mind. He said nothing to Beth, choosing to push aside his suspicion, so he decided to keep an eye on things and review the recordings over the following days. After all, maybe there was nothing strange going on. James tried to ignore what he'd seen in those recordings, but the lingering doubt wouldn't go away, and he kept rationalizing what he had seen, trying to convince himself there could be a logical explanation. But still, that unease felt like a shadow always present, and he found himself thinking about the mysterious man at odd moments, as if part of his mind wouldn't rest until he knew what was going on. 2 days later, as part of his new routine, he reviewed the footage again. He felt an odd sense of relief, seeing nothing unusual in most of the videos. However, as he moved to that morning's recordings, the sensation returned. The same man was there again in James's house, walking with the same familiarity, as if he was perfectly at ease. This time James couldn't ignore it. He watched the stranger's movements closely, noting every detail, his posture, the way he looked around, the slow, deliberate steps. This wasn't someone who was there to fix something or perform a repair, and with each passing second the scene felt more bizarre and unsettling, leaving James with an overwhelming sense that something serious was happening, something he could no longer ignore. The situation seemed to demand more than passive observation, and he needed to know more to feel in control of what was happening in his own home. With quiet determination, James decided to increase surveillance. That night, he installed more cameras in strategic spots, one in the living room where the stranger seemed so at ease, and another in his bedroom, as if he was finally ready to uncover what was going on, no matter what he might find. He still had not said anything to Beth, but knew deep down he needed to see it for himself without raising suspicions or unnecessary alarms. It was as if an instinct was guiding him, a need to solve the mystery that seemed to involve not only his house, but everything he thought he knew about his life. As he adjusted the cameras, James felt the weight of his decision, now more than ever. He needed answers, and with the new cameras installed, James felt like he had planted watchful eyes in every corner, ready to reveal whatever lay behind those mysterious encounters. He knew the answers would come sooner or later, and though he was eager, he also felt a strange fear of what he might discover. The days dragged on slowly and silently, as if the whole house was caught in an invisible tension. He tried to keep up with the routine and act normally with Beth, but his mind always drifted back to the cameras. Like a magnet drawn to a dark mystery, finally, after a week while the kids were at school and the house was empty, James decided it was time to review the recordings. He sat at his computer, took a deep breath, and began going through the footage. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He saw Beth taking care of the house, the kids playing, and the small details that made up the family's day-to-day. It was a relief, almost enough to convince him that maybe he was overreacting, but as he reached that morning's footage, his sense of peace fell apart. There in front of his eyes was an image he never imagined he'd see. The same man appeared again, but this time the scene was clear. It was devastating and impossible to ignore. He watched in shock as the man and Beth were together in his own bedroom, in his own bed, in an intimacy that made every cell in his body burn with disbelief and pain. Time seemed to drag as James processed what he was seeing, every detail searing into his mind like a scar he knew he would never be able to erase. The room seemed to spin around him, and he needed a moment to gather himself to understand that this wasn't a nightmare, it was real, and it was there recorded for him to see. This left no room for doubt. The betrayal was exposed, and he felt both defeated and furious, as though a storm of emotions was ready to erupt within him. James couldn't look away, watching the scene with growing bitterness, as if each passing second stripped away a piece of what he knew about himself, his life, and everything he had built with Beth. The pain of discovery still burned in James's chest when he decided to confront Beth. He knew he couldn't ignore it and couldn't pretend nothing had happened. The images were etched in his mind, every detail, every move like an open wound that throbbed with every memory. He needed answers. He longed for some kind of explanation, even if he knew deep down that no justification could truly ease what he felt. He waited until the kids were out trying to keep his composure. When Beth returned from dropping the kids off at school, she found James standing in the living room with an expression she had never seen before. He was holding his phone in his hand, his fingers almost trembling, and his eyes, usually warm, were cold and distant, as if she were a stranger. Beth looked at him curiously, but the slight smile on her face faded when James, without a word, showed her the footage. The silence in the room was heavy. As the video scenes played out before her, and Beth's expression changed from shock, then shame, and finally despair. She began to cry, tears streaming down her face, and a string of apologies began spilling from her mouth between sobs. "James, please forgive me. I don't know what happened. It was something trivial, something that meant nothing. I won't do it again, I swear. Please believe me," she pleaded, her voice broken, and her eyes begging, trying to find a hint of compassion in that closed-off face. But James watched her in silence, not responding, letting every word of hers echo without effect. He had already heard enough, had seen enough. No matter how much she begged, no matter how much she cried and tried to explain, he knew that something between them had been destroyed, something that couldn't be repaired. Beth kept talking, clinging to the last chance of reconciliation, saying it had been a mistake, that she still loved James, that it meant nothing to her. But James looked at her with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He thought of all the promises they had made, every moment he trusted her without question, and the sense of betrayal was so deep that any excuse felt like another knife piercing his heart. Finally, James spoke, his voice low, but full of a firmness she had never heard before. He said he couldn't accept it, that there was no way to erase what he had seen, nor could he pretend nothing had happened. He wasn't there to judge or fight, just to make it clear that the trust that existed between them had been broken, and for him there was no turning back. Beth collapsed to the floor, sobbing, her face buried in her hands, but James, with a broken heart, turned and left the room. He knew that this was the end of a part of his life, a part he had built with love and dedication, now in ruins over something she insisted on calling trivial. The decision was made, and though each step toward moving forward caused him an inexplicable pain, James knew that divorce was the only way out. In the days that followed, the house seemed gripped by an almost palpable silence, as if every wall bore the weight of unspoken words and broken promises. Beth tried to explain herself in every possible way, but James remained firm. He barely recognized his own life, and avoided even looking at the person who had once been his great love. He navigated through this sea of conflicting feelings, and an unexpected discovery turned his pain into indignation. While checking some details of the divorce, James decided to investigate who, after all, was the man who had entered his home without any respect or fear. He knew only the basics, the face etched in his memory, but soon a name surfaced among rumors and information he gathered from mutual acquaintances. Beth's lover was none other than Robert Davidson, a man with a solid reputation as a gynecologist in the city. The irony and absurdity of the situation were almost unbearable. He was a doctor, someone with an oath of trust and ethics, who had taken advantage of his position to build a facade of respect while crossing the line in a treacherous and dishonorable way. Worse, James soon discovered that Robert was also married with young children, living a facade as stable as James's own life had once been. James's indignation transformed into something deeper, a kind of mission. It was no longer just about his personal pain, but an almost irrepressible desire for justice, to expose what he felt. It was an unacceptable affront. This doctor, who apparently had everything, a respectful family, a stable career, and had trampled on what was most sacred to James and his family, yet the weight of the information was too heavy to carry alone. James began to consider the impact this revelation would have. Each thought felt like a double-edged sort of choice between maintaining dignity and privacy or revealing to the world what this man had done. He knew that exposing Robert would have profound consequences not only for him, but also for Beth and Robert's own family, who would experience the pain of betrayal just as he had. With each passing day, James felt a growing mix of frustration and an almost uncontrollable urge to reveal the whole truth. The image of Robert, the man who had invaded his home, and his life wouldn't leave his mind. It was like a constant shadow reminding him of everything he had lost and every moment he would never get back. Robert, with his pristine image of respect and trust, was leading a life of lies while destroying others. James, on a quiet night while reviewing the recordings one last time, James made his decision. He knew it wasn't just about exposing an affair, it was about showing who this man truly was. James believed that if Robert could do something so despicable without remorse, he didn't deserve the respect and trust his position gave him. Determined, he separated the clearest clips from the recording, the ones that left no doubt about who was the man in bed with Beth. With the video ready, James felt a mix of guilt and determination. He knew that by sharing the footage, he would be opening the door to a scandal that would impact not only Robert, but also Beth himself, and even Robert's wife, who lived in complete ignorance of the kind of man she had married. Still, something in his heart told him it was the right thing to do, that the truth had to be revealed no matter the cost. When he posted the video, James chose to say nothing, no captions or explanations. He knew the images would speak for themselves, and that there was no need to add anything to the harsh reality. In a matter of minutes, the video began to circulate. It was shared, commented on, spread quickly, until it became impossible to ignore. Robert, once a respected name in the city, began to watch his life unravel as quickly as he had invaded James's. In the days that followed, the backlash was devastating for Robert. Patients who had trusted his work, and they canceled appointments, clinics dismissed him, and he was forced to face the accusatory and distrustful looks of a community that had once held him in high regard. Robert's wife, after seeing the video, left their home with the kids, refusing to even look at him again. James watched from a distance, feeling a bittersweet sense of relief. He knew the pain of seeing his life fall apart would never truly leave him. But at least now the weight of the betrayal was out in the open as Robert faced public scandal and the scorn of everyone around him. James observed the consequences of his decision with a complex mix of relief and introspection. The public revelation had unleashed a storm, a collapse that not only exposed Robert's true character, but also ended the circle of lies and betrayals surrounding him. Now Robert no longer had his practice, respectful colleagues, or a home to return to at the end of the day. For James, there was something liberating about finally seeing the truth come to light. He found himself reflecting on what his life had represented before that painful chapter, and how trust for him was an unchanging value. What he hadn't anticipated, however, was the deeper impact his decision would have on himself, as if the act of revealing the truth had both freed and transformed a part of who he was. The days followed with a strange calm. The anger had dissipated, and the void left by the end of the marriage now felt like a blank page, a space to be filled with new possibilities. James dedicated himself to rediscovering things that once seemed small: a walk in the park, the tranquility of a hot coffee in the morning. Gradually, he was finding meaning in the little things he had neglected over the years, but more than that, he realized that the pain had taught him a valuable lesson. Over time, the desire for revenge that had once consumed him was replaced by a new understanding of himself and the life he wanted to build. He understood that trust was a rare gift, but that the courage to face the truth was even more valuable. In this new chapter, he knew that above all, he wanted to build a life where transparency and honesty would be his foundation, with no secrets, no illusions. As devastating as everything had been, James felt that there was a quiet peace emerging from the ruins. He no longer needed validation or explanations. All that remained was the certainty that the truth, no matter how harsh, had the power to set him free, and that freedom was something no one could take from him. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you for the next story.